On the morning of January 2nd, 2024, at a small dental clinic in downtown Springfield, what should have been a routine dental checkup quickly turned into a dramatic and unexpected event. A woman, dissatisfied with having to wait for her medical documents, caused a commotion at the clinic, drawing the attention of the police. What began as a seemingly harmless argument escalated into a tense standoff between the patient, the clinic staff, and law enforcement, leaving behind a humorous yet insightful lesson about patience. The dental clinic staff, despite their years of experience in handling tense situations, found themselves increasingly rattled by the woman's fiery outburst. They had become accustomed to the occasional frustration of patients, but the intensity of her anger was unlike anything they had encountered before. They attempted to maintain their usual professionalism, responding with calm voices, offering reassurances, and suggesting that the documents could be mailed later once they were finalized. But the woman's response was swift and scathing. Her eyes, wide with indignation, blazed as she jumped to her feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed an accusatory finger at the receptionist, as if her very presence was a personal affront to the woman's sense of entitlement. The entire clinic seemed to hold its breath as she bellowed, "Why can't you just do your job?" The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Her voice carried an authority that seemed out of place in the humble dental office, as if she was accustomed to being the loudest in every room, her impatience reaching a boiling point. The words came out in sharp bursts, like bullets fired from an unrelenting machine. Her face flushed crimson, her eyes flashing with a fury that seemed to grow with every second. "Why can't you just get it done now?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is ridiculous." To her, the idea of waiting even a moment longer for her medical documents felt like an unforgivable slight. The suggestion to mail them later was seen as nothing short of a personal betrayal. The woman's patience had reached its breaking point, and with every passing second, her fury seemed to rise like a storm cloud, darkening the atmosphere in the clinic. She didn't just raise her voice. Her entire posture became a weapon. Her shoulders tensed, her fists clenched as if she were preparing to strike. The sound of her hand slamming against the reception desk rang out through the room with such force that it seemed to rattle the very walls. Bang, bang, bang! Each strike was an attempt to command the staff into action, as if the noise itself could speed up the slow, methodical processes of the clinic. In a voice that bordered on a scream, she demanded to know why the staff couldn't just do their job. Her words were a harsh rebuke of what she perceived as their incompetence. The receptionist, trying to stay composed, explained once again that the dentist was still finalizing his notes. But the woman didn't allow her to finish. With a scornful sneer, she cut in, not caring for the logic or reasoning behind the explanation. "If I worked like you people, I'd have been fired ages ago," she snapped, her words venomous, aimed to wound. She glared at the young staff member with such intensity that it was as though she were trying to peer into her very soul. The receptionist took a step back, momentarily stunned by the ferocity of the woman's words. The woman, meanwhile, stood taller, as if proud of the verbal lashings she had delivered, completely oblivious to the effects they had on the others around her. The receptionist's efforts to stay calm were beginning to falter, the weight of the woman's accusations pressing down on her. A slight tremor in her voice betrayed the growing tension in the room. She tried to explain again, but the woman wouldn't let up. Every time the receptionist opened her mouth, the woman interrupted, her voice rising higher, her frustration spilling over into each new outburst. Meanwhile, the other patients in the waiting room looked on, unsure how to react. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others seemed to stifle chuckles at the woman's dramatic performance. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, hoping to be as invisible as possible, as though the whole situation were too awkward to bear. But despite the apparent absurdity of the scene, none of them dared to intervene. The woman's anger was palpable, and everyone knew better than to cross her path. The woman, however, was far from finished. She wasn't content with verbal insults alone. Her hands, previously clenched into fists, now became tools of aggression. She slapped the desk again, each time with more force, her hands moving in a rhythmic pattern that felt like a countdown to something even more dramatic. The sound of her palms hitting the hard surface became a rhythmic drumbeat, one that seemed to punctuate every word she spoke, every demand she made. Her mind was clouded with rage. To her, the delay was not just a simple inconvenience. It was a grave injustice, a failure that she could not and would not tolerate. There was no room for reasoning, no space for understanding. In her eyes, this wasn't a minor delay in paperwork. It was a battle for dignity. And she wasn't about to back down. Yet, amid her fury, a question began to emerge. Was she truly upset about the documents, or was she simply looking for a reason to unleash her frustration on a day when nothing seemed to go her way? When asked to leave the dental office, the woman acted as if the space were her personal domain. She declared in a defiant tone, "I'm not going anywhere until you do the right thing," a line that seemed borrowed straight from a dramatic film. To amplify her theatrics, she alternated between storming out of the office and re-entering, as if performing an emotional climax for an invisible audience. Each time she stepped outside, she acted as though embarking on a grand odyssey, glaring back at the staff with a victimized expression full of reproach. Standing in the cold for a moment, she took deep breaths, spread her arms wide as if inviting onlookers to witness her plight, before dramatically pushing the door open and re-entering with renewed fervor. Each return was accompanied by a fresh counterattack, ranging from repeated questions to increasingly loud complaints about the terrible service. She turned the confrontation into a full-blown performance. Leaning over the reception desk, she slammed her hands down hard, scattering pens and papers. The staff behind the counter looked bewildered, but the woman remained oblivious, continuing her impassioned monologue with the vocabulary and fervor of a self-appointed lawyer. Meanwhile, a few other patients in the waiting room discreetly started recording the scene on their phones. The pinnacle of her stubbornness came when she decided to stage a dramatic sit-in protest. She selected a chair in the middle of the waiting room, sat with her back straight, arms crossed, and declared, "You'll have to drag me out of here." Her voice rang out like a challenge to the world. Quiet sighs from other patients mingled with the sound of the automatic door opening and closing behind her, but she paid no mind, as if all the chaos around her was merely the backdrop to her grand performance. By this point, the dental staff had no choice but to call the police, their eyes betraying a mix of exhaustion and resignation. The woman, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, only grew more triumphant, interpreting the arrival of the police as validation of her righteous cause. In her mind, this was no longer a simple argument, but a battle for justice, at least by her own definition. When the police arrived, they exuded the patience of saints, though their eyes briefly revealed a flicker of weariness, as if they had dealt with similar situations countless times before. They began by politely requesting the woman's cooperation, explaining that she had been asked to leave the office multiple times and was now trespassing. Rather than listening, the woman responded with a look of indignation, as though the officers had just insulted her royal dignity. The first explanation was dismissed by her as the buzzing of an annoying mosquito. By the second explanation, she cut in with a lengthy speech about her civil rights and the responsibilities of the government, causing one of the officers to glance at his watch. By the third explanation, she completely ignored the content, turning to accuse the dental staff of being insensitive, as if they had been plotting for a long time to make her angry. Her actions didn't stop at words. With defiance, she stood in front of the door, her arms spread wide as though blocking an invasion. One officer gently attempted to guide her aside so as not to obstruct others, but she wouldn't relent. "I'm not a dog for you to tell where to go," she yelled, her voice echoing through the room like a siren. Indeed, the chaos that followed her words was like a pack of hounds unleashed. The patients in the waiting room became anxious, some stealthily recording the event on their phones, while the dental staff struggled to suppress frustrated sighs. The woman not only refused to sit still, but continuously moved, deliberately positioning herself to block the officers and staff. Every time they reminded her, she repeated the same line about not being a dog, accompanied by aggressive gestures like placing her hands on her hips or pointing at the faces of those around her. The officers, displaying incredible patience, tried to remain calm, as they emphasized that she needed to cooperate to avoid being charged. But the more they spoke, the more irrational accusations she threw at them. "You are insulting me! This is clear abuse of power!" she declared, her eyes gleaming with victory as if she had uncovered a grand conspiracy. What was once a quiet room for dental patients waiting for their turn had now turned into a tense battleground. The air was thick with discomfort, only broken by the heavy footsteps of the police moving back and forth, and the woman's increasingly agitated voice, completely forgetting that she was simply trying to collect a dental file. As the officer's patience wore thin, the decision to arrest her was made, and that's when the drama of "I'm not resisting while clearly resisting" began. As soon as one officer placed a hand on her arm, she jerked away violently as if trying to ward off a life-threatening danger. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she screamed, her shrill voice making a few bystanders instinctively cover their ears. But she didn't stop at shouting. She quickly switched to physical action, flailing her arms as if swarmed by bees, while her feet stomped the floor in an effort to maintain her position as the police tried to lead her out. "Don't touch me! This is an assault!" she boldly declared, even though she was the one yanking her arms away to avoid being handcuffed. Every step she took backward resembled a dramatic retreat, turning the entire arrest process into a clumsy tango rather than a legal enforcement action. Amidst the flailing arms and protests, she locked eyes with one of the body cams, her expression seeming to say, "The world will know the truth about this injustice." Clearly, she was ready to be the star of a viral video. "I'm not resisting," she repeated, mixed with spins that, from a distance, might have looked like an audition for an action movie. As the officers finally managed to subdue her, the drama shifted to a new chapter. The tragic heroine. She collapsed, as if her legs could no longer hold her, her eyes welling with tears and her voice choking, as if calling out from the depths of suffering. "Mom!" she cried, causing a few passers-by to glance over, unsure whether this was an arrest scene or a soap opera. She continued to repeat emotional laments. "I just want my documents. Don't you understand me?" The sound carried out to the parking lot, drawing the curious gaze of a few drivers just leaving the dental office. One officer tried to calm her down, explaining that things would move faster if she cooperated, but this only triggered another outburst. "I'm not a criminal, I'm a victim," she screamed, pounding the air with desperation, as if playing a character in a Shakespearean tragedy. Her suffering reached its peak when she screamed, "All I want is to be treated like a human being." A statement both heroic and ironic, given that she was being handcuffed for resisting the authorities. The officers exchanged knowing glances, silently agreeing that this was no ordinary arrest, but a psychological test. From the moment she was handcuffed and led to the police car, her cries served as a mournful soundtrack, causing everyone nearby to turn their heads. But for the officers, this was just another entry in a long list of unexpected tasks they faced each day. On the way to the patrol car, her performance took on a tone both terrifying and ridiculous. "You'll all regret this," she yelled, sounding like a prophet foretelling the apocalypse. She began listing a series of bizarre curses, from "everyone's teeth will fall out" to the entire dental office being buried in a storm of cavities. One officer, clearly struggling not to laugh, raised an eyebrow and asked, "A storm of cavities?" but got nothing but a razor-sharp glare in response. She continued, her voice rising, claiming to be the embodiment of justice, the one who would expose the corrupt system. The officers, now with expressions of both weariness and surprise, quietly went about their work, perhaps thinking that this scene was perfectly suited for a reality TV show. Despite her resistance and emotional speeches, the officers eventually got her into the back seat of the patrol car. She continued yelling, trying to negotiate one last time, offering her freedom in exchange for justice. One officer quietly shook his head, responding with a calmness that was almost surreal. "We're just following protocol, ma'am." In return, she unleashed a tirade claiming that one day, history would recognize them as heartless lackeys. The officers, undeterred by her emotions, continued with their work as if it were just another regular Tuesday. As the patrol car rolled away, the sighs of relief from the dental staff could be heard, as they immediately began discussing how to overhaul the waiting room policy, certain that this event would become an internal legend. When the car left, the atmosphere in the dental office was like a pressure valve being released. One employee even muttered, "Maybe we should put up a sign banning excessive dramatics." Meanwhile, the woman on her way to the police station continued lecturing about the injustices in her life, insisting that she was not just a detainee, but a symbol of unwavering resistance. This unfortunate story, which began as a simple dental appointment, had turned into a real-life tragicomedy. It serves as a reminder that in life, patience and mutual respect are key to resolving issues. Had the woman in this story been able to control her emotions, listen, and accept a reasonable solution, it could have all ended peacefully, rather than with handcuffs and criminal charges. The bigger lesson here is that not every problem needs to be solved immediately, and sometimes letting go of one's ego and accepting small inconveniences is the easier path to getting what you want. Life is full of difficulties, but how we respond to them will determine whether they become gentle lessons or self-made tragedies. And of course, in every situation, always remember that words are free. A little calm and courtesy can save you from a lot of trouble.